Showtime, bro.
We are talking Day Shift. This is the new vampire action horror comedy directed by J.J. Perry, actually his feature-length directorial debut. And this is a made-for-Netflix movie that stars Jamie Foxx, Dave Franco and Snoop Dogg. You've also got a few appearances from a couple of other recognisable faces, including Scott Adkins in a great action sequence, Peter Stormare, for example. And in some ways, this movie reminded me a lot of John Carpenter's Vampires. If that movie had been kind of pumped full of steroids and was more comedic, it kind of feels like a successor to that in some ways. So what is the story? Well, this world is a world where vampires are very well established, as are vampire hunters. In fact, there is a kind of a vast network, a union, if you will, of vampire hunters. And Jamie Foxx's character, Bud, actually operates outside of that, having once worked for the union but getting kicked out because of various kind of incidents and stuff. So he's trying to make ends meet, working as a kind of freelance vampire hunter, collecting their teeth and selling them. But he's kind of in debt ultimately and needs to kind of get money to stop his family from moving away. So wants to try and get back in the union's good graces because they pay more money. At the same time, we have this female vampire who is trying to expand the vampire empire, so to speak, and she's kind of buying up property and trying to kind of unite different vampire species to work as kind of one unit. Now, what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, what do we think of this movie? In a way, as well as reminding me a little bit of the John Carpenter vampires, it reminded me of previous Netflix movie called Bright that starred Will Smith. It has that kind of like bigger budget, but not big budget, if that makes sense, feel to it, where we have lots of kind of explosions and kind of car chases and things. But you know, it maybe lacks a little bit of the kind of the deepness or the polish than maybe a true kind of blockbuster. What do I think that works? First of all, I think Jamie Foxx is excellent. He makes a very, very likeable, charismatic protagonist who we can kind of easily kind of gravitate to and follow through the movie. I liked his character, I like his relationship with his family, with Snoop Dogg, who plays kind of like a more senior kind of vampire hunter, and has some kind of great moments and some quite comedic moments as well. But he also holds his own in the action sequences. Speaking of the action sequences, there is a lot of them, a hell of a lot of them. It almost seems like every 5 minutes there's another action sequence in the movie. The standout one for me is where the character of Bud, played by Jamie Foxx, enters this kind of vampire nest and he's accompanied by these two vampire hunting brothers, one of which is played by Scott Adkins. That to me was the standout action piece. It was about midway through the film. But there's lots of kind of action sequences within it, car chases, gunfights, fist fights, knife fights. They're all in here and they're very kind of frequent. I also like some of the touches that were done with the vampires. For example, when the vampire sees itself in the mirror, they are, of course, don't see their own reflection, but you can see the clothes they're wearing, for example, which is a good detail because you often see when a vampire looks in the mirror, their clothes are invisible as well, which doesn't really make sense when you think about it. I love the kind of the dynamics of the vampire bodies because there's a lot of jumping around, a lot of vampires can get it thrown around, and they get thrown around like rag dolls with their bodies kind of being splayed all over the place. Having worked once in the video game industry, there's a lot of kind of ragdoll physics as they're known, and it's kind of quite fun to kind of see it on screen. The movie does rely on quite a bit on the CGI, which we'll kind of talk about in a little bit, but you know, it's there and it's kind of noticeable, but I think you can kind of look past it to a kind of a certain degree. I like some of the lore that this kind of this movie kind of sets out, there being different kind of species of vampires and things like this, which I thought was quite good. And you know, it's kind of, this movie for rightly or wrongly, you kind of go in with this world already established. It doesn't do too much kind of world building to kind of like get you acclimatized to the kind of the status quo. It just kind of is, and you have to accept it. And I think that was quite a bold choice, and I think some of the stuff you learn along the way, although I'll kind of touch upon that again in maybe what I think doesn't work. Yeah, as I say, the movie goes at a fair old pace because there's like an action sequence every kind of few minutes, which, you know, makes it for an exciting watch, and it has like a bigger budget kind of sheen to it, even though I don't think it kind of reaches like a true blockbustery style look to it. So let's talk about what I think does not work in this movie. I think this movie maybe has a little bit too much action in some instances. I think it could have had a little bit more of the dramatic chops in it, because I think ultimately when you're watching the kind of the 12th vampire fight, it's a little bit shallow, I have to say. I think some of the action is very kind of stylized, very kind of computer enhanced. I don't think the CGI is quite there, but I don't know. I mean, after a couple of times, I think these vampire fights just seem like you're going through the motions. Oh, it's another kind of group of kind of faceless vampire hoodlums and things like that. We know our kind of characters aren't going to get any real kind of danger and things like that. It's just lots of kind of like, yep, foot soldiers, foot soldiers, foot soldiers. I think maybe they could have injected a little bit more pathos, a little bit more kind of dramatic chops into the movie. I appreciate it's a comedy, but, you know, a vampire kind of action comedy, but, you know, you could have, I think had a little bit more stakes to, if you excuse the pun, a little bit more, you know, a little bit more of a deeper film, because it's very kind of shallow. And I know this kind of takes place in Los Angeles, and that's all about being shallow, but to me, I just felt like it was a very surface level movie in kind of some respects. I really didn't think the character of Dave Franco worked, and his relationship with Jamie Foxx's character. Nothing about that character I thought really worked. I mean, there's nothing against Dave Franco, but his character seemed unnecessary. It looked like they were going for a kind of a buddy cop kind of style of movie at one point, but his character never really felt like it gelled too well with the Jamie Foxx character. He seemed kind of he's meant to be an annoying character initially, but obviously he has the arc where he finds his kind of like his inner strength and all of that. But to me, his character just didn't work. It didn't really feel like a kind of a natural fit with Jamie Foxx's character. He felt somewhat superfluous, and a little bit his comedic elements as well really kind of fell flat, at least for me. And the other thing I think that kind of goes hand in hand with that, with like Dave Franco's character's arc, is this movie is so predictable. It is a paint by the numbers script, where you can kind of guess everything that's going to happen. I'm not going to give spoilers away here, but nonetheless, I think it's a very, very obvious where it's going. It never really has too many surprises. I think our head vampire woman was a little bit kind of like underwhelming, to be honest with you. I think maybe because there's so many kind of vampire fights, there's so many kind of vampires that get killed, and when you can compare it to maybe vampire hunters who do or do not get killed, again, the stakes, if you excuse the pun again, feel quite low. It really lacks any type of bite. I'm on a roll today. Like I've mentioned, the CGI feels like it's a little bit on the kind of the cheaper side. There's a little bit of hoo-ha in 2022 about these kind of the CGI in Hollywood. So it's there, it's noticeable. We'll just kind of like breeze past that one. And I feel like this movie's, as I've mentioned before, it has a lot of kind of like elements that are in this world that you just have to accept. We don't really know anything about the kind of the vampire hunters. We get dropped a lot of exposition by Dave Franco's character about the vampires. He literally stops and tells us there's all these kind of various kind of different types of vampires. He stops the movie and literally has this kind of like exposition scene where he just spills out all this kind of stuff about all these different kind of styles of vampires. But there are other parts where I feel the vampire hunters themselves, how they came about, how Jamie Foxx's character got into that, nothing. overall, I think you can enjoy this movie on a surface level. It's a fun romp. You know, there's lots of kind of action, there's lots of kind of fun fight sequences. The vampires themselves, admittedly, I don't think that come across as particularly threatening because so many of them can get killed, and it seems rather easy, and so few, if any, of the protagonists, you know, seem to kind of like really have any genuine kind of threat against them. So it feels very lightweight, but I will give it an above average mark because I do think it's entertaining just on a pure spectacle level, but it's really very, very shallow. 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.